No. Okay, I hear an echo now. Perfect. Good. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I will. Okay. Albedo is another word for reflectivity. And so when a substance has really high reflectivity, we say it's high albedo, A-L-B-E-D-O. And you'll see this term repeatedly in this talk. So a material that has a high albedo, like snow, for instance, snow reflects away about 90%, fresh, clean snow reflects about 90% of the incident solar energy upon it, right? And so how much of it is then being absorbed? Please. 10%. 10%, right? So if the albedo of the snow declines to, let's say, 80%, how much is being absorbed? 20%. So what is the change in the amount of energy being absorbed when we just change the albedo from 90 to 80? It's doubled, right? Yeah. So a small change in albedo of a very bright substance matters a lot. It matters a lot to climate because our planet, when it has snow on it, doesn't get as warm. In fact, what's the temperature? What's the highest temperature that snow can get? How hot can snow get? And so, yeah, it can only go to 0, right? So as long as snow is there, the surface can only get as warm as 0 C. And also, as long as snow is there, it's reflecting away a significant amount of solar energy. So snow plays a critical role in keeping our planet cool, and it also plays a critical role in water. And not just in the Western US, but also everywhere, because you think about snow as being, it melts and it's kind of like the drip irrigation. It recharges the groundwater, and it's also really critical for soil moisture. But I'm going to be talking mostly about Western US sorts of things today, because that's where I live. I live in the driest state in the country. Okay, and there we go. Right, so the problem with trying to measure snow is it's really challenging. This is one of our field sites in Alaska. We had to get dropped off here by tundra plane, and then we're hiking down these steep sides, installing these giant like snow monitoring these poles and these hunters cameras and stuff. And then this was last year in Alaska. It was like so cold, and you cruise around on skis with a pack on, and then you stop in big snow pits and take a bunch of samples and measure a bunch of stuff with the instrument that measures the albedo of snow. And you can kind of see in this forest, see the forest litter that's here, not in the backpack, but there's stuff on this snow, and that naturally falls from the trees. But then the other part of it, as you'll see in a minute, later in the talk, there's a lot of stuff that falls off of trees that have been burned, like black carbon. So in this picture, I'm wearing, this is a giant snowmobile coat. I know I have something under there. These are pants with these giant, they're called puffy pants. You probably don't know what they are, but they're like down pants that make you look like the Michelin Man. And you're just like trying to get work done. It's super hard to do that in snow. Whoopsie, here we go. Why is this? Oh, sorry. Back this way. Okay, so we do a lot of satellite remote sensing of snow because satellites have great just repeat coverage all the time. It doesn't care how cold it is at the surface of the Earth. And we, in my group, we do a number of different kinds of satellite remote sensing of snow. We work in the more traditional visible and infrared, you know, the light that's reflected by solar reflectance. And we use multispectral and also hyperspectral. I'll show about some new ways of characterizing snow using multispectral data from MODIS, which is the Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer, and some work on snow and fire, and then some other work on radar. We're using L-band radar to measure changes in this quantity called snow water equivalent. And this is like one of the holy grails of snow research. Like, this is saying, if you melted that snowpack instantaneously, how much actual liquid water would you get out of that? Because for hydrologic purposes, that's what we really care about. Except then try to imagine that across like a whole region where it's melting and going into the rivers. So we want to be able to map changes in snow water equivalent. Is it getting deeper? Is it starting to melt? we can do that to some extent, not during the melt period, but we can actually do that to some extent with radar. And then a really interesting one with multi-angular remote sensing. And I always see this, like, look down at the table in front of you. I can look at this table and you see the reflection off of it. Even without touching it, our eyes can go, oh yeah, that's smooth. But then if you look at the carpet, you're like, I don't see any specular reflection off of that. It's pretty sort of isotropic. And you could, even without touching it, you would know that it's a little bit rough. It's definitely rougher than this. So your eyes are doing multi-angular remote sensing all the time. So it's actually really cool to be able to distinguish without even, you don't need an electron microscope to tell them it's pretty smooth. So you can really use those examples to dream up cool ways of using multi-angular remote sensing. And we've been able to detect clouds over snow. Why is that hard? Clouds are white, snow is white. You can't use spectral, like wavelength information. It just looks the same. But you can use multi-angular information, and that works great. Okay, so onward, this is some of these new, this is the multi-angular part. So some colleagues and I, we got some funding from NASA for the this global change project. And so my colleague Eric Sproles, who's at Montana State, he and I came up with this thing called Snow Cloud Metrics. It's a web-based app, and it's global. And what we've done is we created a number of different metrics that we think are useful for characterizing snow locally, regionally, globally. Normally, when you have all those stations with the red dots that I showed earlier, those red dots are stations. They sit there, they're in the same location, and most places don't have station data. And they don't necessarily tell you what's going on at higher elevations or at lower elevations where the snow is melting. They're kind of in these average parts of the seasonal snow zone. And there are a lot of other things that we care about snow. So, but it turns out with remote sensing, here's this metric called snow cover frequency, and it's kind of like an empirical version of probability. But so we calculate the number of times snow is observed in a pixel, in an image pixel. And so snow cover frequency is sort of a proxy for like how much snow is there, because if you know you're in the lower 48 states, if the snow is there for a really long time, it's not ephemeral, and you probably have a lot of it, and so that kind of matters. And then the other one that turns out to be really interesting is the snow disappearance date, the day when the snow's all gone at the end of winter. You actually have to start counting and count backwards to figure that one out. It's a little tricky. Anyways, we have these products, and they look like this. Here's an example of snow cover frequency. There it is, sort of the global coverage for that. So it's 0 to 1. And then this is for 2015, just as an example, and there's 2019 for the snow season. And you can see this was a low snow year, and this was a very high snow year. This is the California Sierra Nevada, which exists along here. So this is where I live. Over, where am I? I'm over here. I live here. And so this is Lake Tahoe right there. And that's Pyramid Lake. Okay, and then, so that's just one example. Then here's another example of the snow disappearance date. Right now, we're really just working, it's valid for the Northern Hemisphere because, you know, it's actually a date. And so we're coming up with a Southern Hemisphere version. It's not a big deal. But you can see that the snow disappeared a whole lot earlier in 2015 than it did in 2019. And one of the reasons we care about that is because of fire. When the snow disappears earlier, you have a lot more time for a fire. And there's just a lot of dry season. Okay, so there's this term albedo again, remote sensing of snow albedo. And one of the things we care about with that is that we actually don't have high accuracy or precision with albedo. And remember, I gave you that example where if you have a small change in a big number, it matters. Well, if your uncertainty is on the order of even greater than 5%, you're going to get a wrong answer in your climate model. And you're calculating the way that the sun interacts with this bright surface. And the climate model, the land surface model, part of the climate model for climate change modeling, is probably going to either keep the snow on for too long or not melt it off fast enough. And so we really want to improve our accuracy and precision with when it beat down the uncertainties for snow albedo. So there are a number of different sensors that regularly produce products that are sort of good albedo products, not necessarily for snow. Landsat, you probably know a lot about that. MODIS, which is the moderate resolution spectroradiometer that's been around for 20, I don't know, 4 years or something. And then we've got some hyperspectral instruments. Who here is working on hyperspectral? Okay, so you know what I mean. Hyperspectral, meaning a lot of wavelengths. And the thing that's cool about snow, well, first off, what color is snow? White? No. What color is snow? It's blue. It's just that your eyes saturate. You think it's white. But if you were to dig a little hole in the snow, which I'm sure we've all done when we're playing in the snow as kids, you can see it's a little bit blue. It's that really pretty color of blue, right? Well, this is sea ice, but same idea. So snow is actually blue and in the visible part of the spectrum. But what color is snow in the near infrared? In the thermal, it's black. It's the blackest substance on Earth. It's simultaneously the brightest and the blackest substance on Earth, from the visible to the thermal. But in the middle, in the shortwave infrared, it's wild. It goes down and then it goes up again and then it goes down again and up again. So if my advisor used to say this, if we could see in infrared, we'd be so excited during the snowmelt season when the grain size is changing, because it would be like going to the Northeast, to Vermont, with the color like that. But so anyway, so with hyperspectral instruments, we can do that. We can tell what's happening with the albedo of snow, with things that affect the albedo of snow, like soot and dust and grain size, snow grain size. And we can do that in the field with field spectrometers and validate all these things. But the issue is a lot of uncertainty, but also uncertainty over disturbed landscapes. So if you have a fire, who knows? We actually don't know. We have a research project right now to better understand what's happening with the albedo for years after fire, when the burn stuff is shedding off of those trees, making the snow a lot darker. And there's also huge variability over spatial scale. With my field spectrometer, I'm down there and I'm measuring the snow albedo. But when we go and look at the Landsat image, it's showing me, 30-meter pixels and a whole lot of stuff, right? And so the landscape albedo is really different from the snow albedo. Snow and fire. This is what we've been working on lately. All the black blobs up there are where there's fire. And we've had a number of snow sampling sites with the stars. This is some work that my former PhD student, Kelly Gleason, did a couple of years ago, more than a couple now. And the other thing that's interesting is this inset graph where she's showing the change in the seasonal snow zone area that's been burned. And fires burn in the forest. The forest exists on a mountain in the west. And then the seasonal snow zone covers a lot of that, all the way from the top of the mountain down to wherever there's the snow line. But what we've noticed is that these fires keep burning up into elevation, and in some cases even go up and over the mountain ridges. Fires normally just burn up and stop. But the winds that are associated with them, the dryness of the forest, that is also related to not having enough snow. All of those things affect the fire behavior. And then because those fires are now much more severe than these, like hotter and more crispy burn, you see these effects after the fire. So snow matters before a fire in terms of providing moisture for the forests, but snow is impacted after the fire because it's burned off the canopy and it has affected the snow albedo. So here's a picture of an area with high burn severity. This is one of the places where we've been working. You can see just the burnt trees. These were little trees, but take a look at this. This is all the carbon that's been shedding off of these little trees. Every tree that you see here and even in between. And you can kind of tell just by looking at the surface, it's kind of melty. And so it's really melting earlier and faster after fire. Not only that, but you have all the sunshine coming in and hitting it, right? So no more canopy and dirty snow equals earlier melt. And this is what it looks like, just taking a scoop out of that. So after fire, the snow disappearance date shifts earlier, and this effect lasts for more than a decade. This is sort of what it looks like here. Here we go. This is years. This is the fire year, and so these are the years before the fire. And these black dots show the snow disappearance date. And then after fire, you can see the snow disappearance date is much earlier. And so those positive numbers just mean an earlier shift. So, and then we also see a much bigger number of fires. So this is across lots of fires, not just one or two. But we've actually seen a shift in places where we've worked in Oregon on the order of weeks, like 2 to 5 weeks earlier in some of these fires, some of the parts of the fires. But if you look at the whole fire and average it, this you sort of get on the order of 4 days. So it's important. Fires kill snow. Here's an unburned forest in Alaska. This is looking down from a little plane where we were flying. And what you see are the skinny trees. And you'll notice that there's not much snow in the trees here. These are the black spruce that when it snows, they kind of do this thing and the snow slides off. But the other thing you notice is that from the air, the albedo, landscape albedo, is kind of dark, right? You see a lot of the trees. If you're on the ground walking around, you're seeing the snow that's right in front of you. So the difference between the snow albedo and the landscape albedo is really big. And what we notice also is that this is a map of the uncertainty created by my colleague Glenn Liston in this project that's funding what we're doing. And what he's showing is that the time integrated effect of solar zenith angle summed over the snow season and scaled to range from 0 to 1, those are the colors. And this is just for forested areas. So you can kind of skip looking at the purple forested areas. That's where you have relatively low uncertainty in these. So albedo uncertainty is really big when you have a low sun angle, like in the boreal forest and in the forest. So this was really plotting out places where you have forest and where you have relatively large solar zenith angles, low sun angles, right? And so you can see all of these red and yellow zones. That's where you have the highest uncertainty, and that's where we want to work. And that's where we have the boreal forest that's burning. This is not tundra, this is boreal forest. And look at Siberia, holy moly, there's a lot. So the boreal forest actually is the largest terrestrial ecosystem. So it's really big. So here's a diagram that I put together a little while ago. And what I'm showing is on the top row is if we're looking straight down from a satellite. And over here in the top left, that row A is, okay, here's some trees. And you can see the canopy and you can see some snow. The trees are casting shadows on the snow. And then if you had a low density forest, just a few trees poking out through the snow, maybe they're not that tall either and the shadows are relatively small. And then if you had a fire that burnt all of that, this is what it looks like from the side, that middle panel. And looking at it from the top, you have black carbon surrounding those burnt trees. And that really is what those burnt trees look like in the post-fire forest there in the middle. But as far as the snow goes, you see really, might see heavy forest litter in this one. So if you're just looking at the snow, it looks like this. In a low density forest, the snow's pretty clean. But over here, you have black carbon and burned woody debris on the snow surface. So again, this paradox that's so interesting. After the fire, the canopy's gone and the landscape's really bright. So as far as the atmosphere is concerned, things are cooling off. It's bright. But as far as the snow is concerned, it's dark, getting hammered by sunshine and melting earlier. So one of the questions then is, if you were to kind of integrate it over the spring season, is it ultimately darker because the snow melts off so much earlier? Or is it ultimately brighter because you moved the dark stuff from your scene, even though the snow is darker? So we don't know. That's a question. So anyways, that's kind of a fun thing to think about. All right, so how am I doing on time? Okay, good. All right, so this is one of the ways it looks. So you can see here's the haystack fire. This is where we're working in Alaska. So the haystack fire in 2021, and this is what it looked like last spring. So we're just kind of working away on that. And here it is from Landsat. So you can kind of see before the fire, it's dark. After the fire, much brighter. So we're comparing landscape albedo and ground-based albedo. And then we'll be using a drone, whoopsie, sorry. We'll be using a drone this year to look at that scale question as we go up in elevation. Oh, come on. Don't menu. There we go. Yeah, and so these are some measurements that we made, and it's super interesting because we had this hyperspectral airborne instrument called Avarice. Anybody familiar with that? A couple of people. Airborne, visible, infrared imaging spectrometer. Without actually Avarice NG, the next generation Avarice. So we had this flying on a NASA aircraft. So it has pretty high spatial resolution, I think on the order of 4.5 meters. But still seeing trees. And Landsat 30-meter pixels, and then our little spectrometer, which had a field of view of about 20 centimeters of diameter. And so you can see the differences here. Landsat and Avarice are lower, but in fairly good agreement, actually, which is interesting. But the spectrometer was much higher. And we think that's because it's just not seeing any trees. Same thing up above. So one of these is in the open forest and the other is in the burned forest. So we're going to be making more measurements, and hopefully we will be characterizing the albedo of snow in burned forests, especially in places that have large solar zenith angles during winter when the sun's low in the sky, and using that as a way to improve the characterization, parameterization of albedo in land surface models, climate models. So the climate models need to be able to accurately characterize going on in the Arctic with snow. That's the place where things are melting faster than anywhere, even faster than sea ice declines. You know, you always see those in September, they show like, oh my God, the sea ice declined even more. Well, the Arctic snow has been changing even faster than that. So that's another reason why we want to get albedo right in these climate models. But you have to figure out what's going on. So, all right, so that's that part of the talk. Now, this part of the talk is shifting. We have some old problems, but we're going to try to we're taking a stab at new methods. So one of the biggest problems that we have is, okay, so we can kind of measure the albedo of snow. We can actually determine the grain size of snow from space. It's kind of crazy. We can figure out snow depth. Do you guys know what LIDAR is? You're familiar? Okay, so we can use what we call a differential LIDAR technique. So you fly over your mountain region where you usually have snow, but you fly over it in summer when there's no snow. And ideally, you fly it late in the season where also all the vegetation is kind of mostly dead, but before the snow falls. Then the snow builds up over the winter, and then you fly it again during like maybe the middle of winter, and then you fly it again when you think you're going to have like the most snow, and then you fly it again after it started melting, and you get the change in snow depth over time. Just depth though. And depth doesn't tell you necessarily how much water is in the snow. So you have to model the density of the snow. So depth times density gives you that water equivalent, the snow water equivalent. And that is the big challenge. That's the holy grail for snow hydrologists. And the other one is in a lot of places, well, snow comes from clouds, duh. But like there are always clouds around the mountains. But how do you then see what's cloud and what's snow? Especially in the Arctic, or like places where you have sea ice. I'll show you an example. So that's where that multi-angular thing comes into play. So these are just a couple things that my students have been working on most recently, the 2 PhD students. So here is a diagram of L band, which is 24 centimeters in wavelength. L band is just the name of that radar frequency. And so we used to think that that was a really useless radar technique for snow because it's the wavelength is long enough that it penetrates the snowpack, doesn't give us any volume scattering at all, and it hits the ground. But it turns out that if you measure it twice at 2 different times, you get this differential in what's called the phase difference. That's what's used in barometry. And so that interferometric image that represents the phase difference between 2 times, you get the vertical displacement. And so as long as there's no seismic activity, earthquakes going on, the vertical displacement is going to be due to snow. The snow's getting deeper, or maybe it's getting less deep. As long as it's not wet snow, radar doesn't really work very well with water. Do you guys know what the dielectric constant is? So the dielectric constant of liquid water is about 80. And so snow disappears when you're using radar and snow's wet. You just don't even see it. It's the same as soil. The dielectric constant of ice is about 3 or 4, pretty low. So it's really different. So as long as the snow's not melting, you can do with radar. Or if the snow's refrozen after a day of melting, it's awesome. So that works really well too. So it turns out that you get this change in snow water equivalent between 2 times if you're looking at it from the same place. This is just showing like topography, but if you have 2 times showing the same, showing a displacement there, you'll get this depth. So you get it using the same approach that geologists use to show subsidence for dome forming processes related to earth movements. So anyways, this program called SnowX, Snow Experiment, we've been doing that for a number of years, and we're using L-band radar. It's also funding the albedo work. But we're also working, I'm not, but one of my former students is at Goddard Space Flight Center, is working with the NASA Indian Space Group. I forget what ISRO stands for, but NISAR, the NASA Indian Synthetic Aperture Radar. And that's supposed to launch this year. It has an L-band. It also has a C-band, if you know about that stuff. But it will have a polar orbit, so it has near global coverage, and a 12-day repeat. So in that 12 days, we think that we can look at vertical displacements in snowpack. And come on, somewhere in here. Okay, yeah, and this is an example of that. So what we see there are in this region here, and actually above that region, it's kind of cool. In the blue area, there was a positive change in snow water equivalent because it was high enough. It was higher in elevation and it snowed and the snow got deeper. But at lower elevation, like in this red area, it had melted and refrozen and gotten lower. So, so you're actually measuring snow water equivalent, not just a change in depth, because it kind of relates to the number density of scatterers that are in there. So there are a number of techniques that they have to use in order to perform in order to use the data. You have to do the phase and wrapping. You have to do an atmospheric correction for path length. But then it turns out it works pretty well. These were the dates, 3 dates on which they had the snow measurements. These are what we call a niveograph. This is just the amount of snow in snow water equivalent units of millimeters at 2 different stations, like those stations that I showed with the red dots earlier. These are 2 stations in New Mexico in the Jemez Mountains, what's called the Valles Caldera, if you've ever been there. Yeah, so this is how much snow we had, and it's just showing that there was some changes at these areas between these different dates. We had 3 flights actually, and on the upper images. I'm just showing the difference between the two. So that's pretty cool. So we're excited about this NISAR instrument. We hope it will actually launch in 2024, probably next year, I'm guessing. Yeah, but it has, depending on how it's being used, it has this pretty fine spatial resolution. Okay, the last thing, almost last thing I want to talk about is this multi-angular instrument. I've been on the MISR science team for a long time. It's the multi-angle imaging spectroradiometer, MISR. So it has 9 cameras. They're symmetric and they're fixed. So it's a push-broom instrument. And so it has really good geometric calibration. It has really good radiometry. It has just 4 wavelengths at each camera. But the important thing is it gives you the angular signature. So you might be familiar with the spectral signature, right? Well, it turns out that materials and different surface roughnesses have a different angular signature. And we know this just by walking around. I gave you that example of the smooth table versus the rougher carpet. So it turns out that clouds and atmospheric phenomenon work that way. You get different atmospheric path lengths with these, but it also matters in terms of distinguishing clouds from other from surface materials. So, oops. Oh, okay. So I'll show you this. Okay. So this was supposed to be animated. This is the very first image that came out of MISR after they took off the lens. They're like, oh, there's James Bay. So James Bay is a lobe off Hudson Bay. So here it is. Here's a little rocky island, and around that island is some ice. It's held fast to the shore, so it's called fast ice. It doesn't move, so it's not actually like fast. It's just held fast. Here's some more fast ice. Anyways, the thing about fast ice, it's pretty smooth. And I don't know if you can see over here. This is a multispectral image. Boring. Just looks like a black and white photo, right? Over here is the multi-angular image. Oh my God, this is so cool. So here's the fast ice. When it's smooth, and the way I've projected into this image, the forward scattering off of the smoother ice is in the blue channel, and the backward scattering, the rougher surface, is in the red channel, so it ends up looking kind of orange. And this is pack ice. You can see like the different ice flows. They look like icebergs. They're just flat. So this all moves around due to wind. This is the fast ice. But see these purple areas here? Those are clouds. And the thing is that clouds have a little bit of forward scattering and back scattering. So the way this is projected in color, you get blue and red. You can see there in the graph, that's cloud. The pack ice is mostly backward scattering, so the viewing zenith angle. So the negative numbers mean backward, scattering back towards the source. And the blue is that smoother fast ice. So now we get a lot of angular information that we don't get from the multispectral data. It's really amazing to have both. Here's a view from the 9 different cameras looking at the same piece of real estate. You can see that it moves a little bit in the overall image. So if the common area, the area that's common to all of them is relatively small, and you'll see that in a minute. There's a cloud in the middle there, and you're looking at sea ice and clouds both, and cloud shadows. So this is just a prep for something. So we've been using a neural net approach with a couple of hidden layers, and trained it on, oh my God, we looked at so many images. My student and I, we just would sit for hours and train ourselves and we looked at a lot of Arctic clouds. So we just had 2 classes, cloudy and clear, that came out of this, but we were using all 9 cameras. So we had really high accuracies. It was better than any other cloud product that we ever had, and it was amazing. And I've talked long enough. So thank you very much. So there's a what's next, hyperspectralness mission, SPG, and NISAR. So, but snow, yeah. Oh yeah, I have to point this out. You see the people? Yeah. Yeah. Where is that? Nice. Where are we? What are we looking at here? I think that's I think that's Mount Adams, in fact.
Okay. This Mount St. Helens?
Yeah, St. Helens, which used to be pointy and now it has a big crater in the middle. And so, yeah, you climb up it winter and ski down. Those are people that are just putting their skis on. Anyways, always got to stop with right, so that's the list of what I've talked about, and I would welcome any questions. Thank you very much.
We start with some non-remote sensing questions.
Of course.
So you said snow isn't really white, it's really blue.
Yes.
I think this picture is a great demonstration of why I'd argue that it's essentially uniform in reflectance, and the blue snow is where there's scattered light from the blue sky. Is there something else I'm missing from there?
No. So blue wavelengths are transmitted. The probability of light scattering is highest in the blue, and so as opposed to being absorbed. So the probability of being absorbed in the blue is lowest, and so you'll have preferential absorption slightly greater in the visible of all the other wavelengths relative to blue. So if you're looking at a spectrum of pure snow, it would peak in the blue wavelengths and then start to go down a little. So that it has the highest reflectance in the blue, and it also has the highest transmittance in the blue. That's why snow looks blue when you dig a cave in it, because it's transmitted, it's not absorbed, where the other wavelengths are absorbed more. And so you're seeing the light that's left over. So when you scoop it out and look in, so you're not really seeing the blue sky. The blue sky is blue because it's right? But the snow.
So in this image, I think it looks blue in the
yeah.
shadows because the Rayleigh scattering.
Because of Rayleigh scattering and it's like in shadows, yeah.
You take advantage of answer.
That you're speaking to a group of people who have color sciences here.
I know, and you know what? I took this.
You ask what color it is.
Yeah. Oh, right. I know, right? Well, it's not cyan. There are other colors. It's not only. Yeah. So, and this I took with my iPhone, right? And there's no color balance here. It's a bright day. But the thing that I love about this image too is look at the Rayleigh component. You're up in really high elevation. Probably a pretty dry atmosphere. You're not really seeing maybe a little bit of heat scattering. Mostly at least at high mountain elevation. Other questions? Yeah.
I was kind of curious, like the graph you showed, like the after the fire incident, the disappearance of snow happened much faster.
Mm-hmm.
So what about the fires, like black carbon, that makes snow faster?
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah. And we can see it mapped over entire burned areas using MODIS. We get images every day, so we can see when the snow disappeared before a fire and after fire. So Kelly Gleason is my former. She and I have been working on this for a while. Pretty dramatic. She's really taken off and look at all these other places too. Interesting. It's not just like 1 or 2 fires. But the other thing is these fires are getting bigger. And so when the snow disappears earlier, there's a really strong correlation between snow disappearance date and the number of fires, the size of the fires, the intensity of the fires, the burn severity, and also an increase in the number of fire complexes when 2 fires merge. So all of those things seem to be related to snow disappearance date. And so maybe snow disappearance date is just a proxy for other things. It could be. Yeah, but it's actually one of those things that you can measure with satellites easily. Look it up on Google Earth, which is code, and say, oh, I think it's going to be a bad or a good fire season, whatever. Yes.
With the multi-angle image, I was wondering, is it like a panchromatic reading for each angle, or
It's
like
4 spectral bands, blue, green, red, and red for that.
Okay,
For
so
each angle, and so, oh, sorry. for each angle, I projected each one into a different color for display. So I used forward, backward, and native for display purposes. And so forward was blue, backward was red, and native was pink.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got that part.
Okay.
My question was, when you're sort of measuring the scattering at each angle, were you like sort of integrating all the bands? Or
No, we only
Per
use the
channel.
red band.
only the red?
Yeah, for the machine learning, we only use the red band. So that information in machine learning was angular only. Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's kind of cool.
So why just the red bands? If I may ask?
Oh, thank you. The red band is the only one that's at 275 meter state resolution. The other bands are 1. And we wanted to have fine description.
Got it. Less scattering.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, yeah, that's what I thought, like,
Yeah,
there would be more atmospheric.
yeah. We did an atmosphere. Well, actually, no, we ended up not using atmosphere. We did. Then we decided, you know what? Maybe it doesn't matter that much. It's red, but also we're trying to distinguish clouds from surface under any conditions. We didn't want to do an atmosphere correction, and we didn't know the cloud top height like that. So all of these reflectances are relative. So are relative to the ellipsoid. There is a GeoA model. This is for clouds. That are relative.
Question that's maybe just more of a hydrology question.
Oh, yeah.
And so, so when you have earlier snow melt, right there, that you potentially have, maybe you don't know the hydrology, have more time for recharge, groundwater recharge. Because you get melting episodes and things like that.
That's a really good point. So Tony brings up a really good point. When snow is melting earlier, what's different about the season? Insolation is lower, right? Day length is shorter, sun's lower in the sky. So overall, if snow's melting earlier, your insolation is lower. So we might have slower snow melt. And maybe we have better ground temperature. We also have, I didn't talk about this, a lot of midwinter melt effects or midwinter sublimation that are amplified by the effect of wildfire. So this is a California study that got published about a year ago. What we see is that, like in end of January, February into March, we see multi-week dry spells in the middle of winter. And it's not uncommon to have a little dry spell. But what has been becoming more common is the multi-week dry spells are longer and we see more dry spells in general. So this is from some climatology colleagues of mine at Scripps. They were that part of it. When we have a dry spell in the Sierra Nevada, it's beautiful and sunny out. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, when's it going to snow? I don't want any sun, but when is it going to snow? And this goes on and on. And when you have a dry spell in the middle of the year, maybe we don't care about snow melt that much because the sun is low in the sky and days are short, right? So insolation is low. But in these burned areas, that's where you have amplification of that effect because the albedo is lower and you don't have canopy anymore. So these dry spells are a big deal in places like that. So dry spells, wildfires amplify the snow melt effects of midwinter dry spells. And so when you have midwinter melt going on, it's not really going into the streams, it's just kind of hanging out, maybe recharging the groundwater. So one of the things, and this isn't published yet, we're sending it off to a high-profile journal. When we look at watersheds across the West, hundreds of them that have had fires, we see a really interesting change in their hydrology. Number one, the base flow, which shows like groundwater increases in the late summer. Like, so there's more base flow, more groundwater after a fire, especially in burned watersheds that have snow. Not the rainy watersheds, but ones with snow dominated watersheds. And then the other thing we see, especially obviously in snow dominated watersheds, is that spring pulse of snow melt comes earlier and it's a little bit higher too. So we just kind of get this bigger pulse of, they call it the freshet. So the freshet is earlier and stronger in snow dominated watershed, but mainly in wet places, not snowy dry places. So if you have a lot of precipitation, which is in the form of snow, these post-fire effects are a big deal. So think about like the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Montana, those Oregon. They're having a lot of fires. What else? I'm drawing on. Maybe it's
Well,
time.
we've got some refreshments outside.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
we'll probably chat some more.
Okay.
So let's thank our speaker again.